Hello? Yep, here we are. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So how's the happiness level today? Hi, great. So, you all know money does not buy happiness, but it can buy a lot of trees. And trees make people happy. So buying happiness might be possible after all. So I think that's the reason why we're here today. We're here today to actually make the business case for trees, for green spaces, for urban agriculture in some respects, for green infrastructure in general. So really we have to understand how we can unlock that value, how we can make people understand that spending money for trees, for green spaces, is not a cost. It's an investment. It's an investment in health, in happiness, in well-being for people in the cities. So today we have a great day, and we'd like to thank the South Africa Presidential Climate Commission, ICLEI Africa C40, and Juan Solomon, particularly from the Green Cape, for making this day possible and helping us put together such a fantastic program today. So I have a few quick announcements to make. Sorry about that, that's part of my job. So for those who have flights tomorrow or Saturday and have been hosted by either us or the city here, if you have not received an email about your airport transfer, please check at the reception to make sure your airport transfer is confirmed. Just to quickly remind you, we had a great poster session yesterday, so there's going to be poster sessions today again, so please make sure that you honor the people who have made the effort to send posters and listen to what they have to say. Another quick point, tomorrow morning the bus from those who are staying in the hotels will leave at 7, not 7:30. So make sure you're there on time, because we have a full program for the tree planting ceremony, followed by the study tours. So make sure you're there on time. And finally, for those who are French speaking and you forgot to get your headphone, you can get your headphones, there's translation available. So make sure you do that. So, going back to the topic of today, can money buy happiness, or can money buy trees? I always think a good story is the best way to start things. And to me, a good story is the story of the little housing complex where I live in Rome. And we have, we're very privileged in Rome to have, I'd say, 20 mature trees inside our compound. Large trees, a lot of ecosystem services. But every year we get the same complaint from the neighbors. Oh, gardening is so expensive, we had to spend $15,000 a year on pruning and trimming. I said, guys, your apartments are worth at least 10% more just for having those trees. We have 100 apartments there, worth about maybe 300,000 euro each. Times 100, that's 30 million. These 10 trees are worth 3 million euro. These 10 trees. So maybe spending 15,000 euro a year on maintenance is a good investment. And then people say, oh yeah, let's plant more trees, let's have more. So it's a simple story, but it tells how you can easily change perception of people just by making them understand what the real value of those services are. For us, it's 3 million euro, for 100 apartments. I think that's a simple story. But I really like to give the floor to those who have maybe better stories or more, let's say, compelling stories about why we should make the business case for trees. And I'd like to start the day with two speakers to help us set the tone for the day. So we are privileged to have with us today Mr. Chepo Makola, who's the acting city manager from the city of Joburg. And he previously was serving as the executive director of the emergency management services, and he was also the chief operations officer for the city. So really, I think this has enabled him to have some crucial insights into urban resilience and also understand how vital natural ecosystems are for cities. And maybe, I'm not sure if you want to call them one by one, maybe Chepo, you want to start, and then we'll give the floor to Beryl. So maybe Chepo, you want to join us here? Yes. Do the one by one. Floor is yours.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
It's okay. Thank you, Program Director, and good morning to the mayors who are with us today, the councillors and all the delegates. As already introduced, my name is Tsepo Makola. I'm the acting city manager in the city of Johannesburg. Of course, my substantive position, I'm the chief operations officer. I'm currently just holding for my boss. He's busy elsewhere. So one of my responsibilities as the executive head responsible for emergency management services was the disaster management aspect. And that part was really talking about climate adaptation and what the city was doing. So I know the challenges we faced in looking at what type of infrastructure can we bring in. And I suppose at this point, it adds a lot of value that I'm now responsible for infrastructure. I can enforce and I can ensure that as part of the planning of the city's infrastructure, we have infrastructure that's able to be adaptable. So our growth and development strategy, one of its 4 outcomes is that the city has to look at sustainable infrastructure that can also support climate change and support the work that we do. And I suppose today's discussion is really about that. So Program Director, it's really an honor to build on a valuable momentum that has happened in these past 2 days here in the African Forum Urban Forestry. I'm happy that one of the executive mayors in the city that actually enforced in us to ensure that this man-made urban forest called the city of Johannesburg continues to grow. Mr. Masondo was honored in one of the functions, and I'm truly indebted to him because the work that you are seeing today and the Johannesburg that you see today was inspired by the work that he done. And I think his philosophy still stays true today, that do what you need to do on a daily basis, whether there's someone watching or not. And the credibility and the sustainability of the city's infrastructure depends on us as the current leaders, because the future leaders would have to take from us. So I suppose we are here today because we are building on the leadership that he had put and the leadership and the ethos of hard work that he had actually given to us. And that we are very grateful that he got honored by this forum, and that we appreciate very much. Program Director, as you know, African cities face a myriad of challenges in terms of planning, designing and building the green infrastructure. And half of that requires financial support. Most of the time you are competing with financial sector in relation to where do you spend. And I'm sure all of you will be aware that the President visited the city of Johannesburg about 2 weeks ago, and the key focus was on how do we build infrastructure such as roads, water, electricity, and solid waste. But what's key for us as planners and executives is that that infrastructure has to be sustainable. It has to help us maintain the climate action plan that we have, but also make sure that we preserve the current environment that we have. And I think that is the challenge. About 2 days ago, we had a session with the Development Bank of Southern Africa to look at how do we fund the forest infrastructure that we can use to really continue greening the city of Johannesburg. One of the outcries that they've raised was, if you look at our townships in the main, you have less trees in the township. And why is that? CEO, I think you then have a massive challenge to convince us when we start the budget steering committee end of this March that we must contribute majority of the capital grant into planting the trees again, particularly in the townships. And that makes sense because that's where most of our population are. If you look at Region G, right in the far south of Johannesburg, we have a lot of informal settlements, but we also have a lot of formal settlements. But what we are lacking is the green infrastructure to try and support that support the sustainability of those regions. The City of Johannesburg is making considerable efforts through its infrastructure asset management improvement program and its climate action plan. I can announce, Chair, that in November last year we took a report to Council that will help us focus on infrastructure for the next 10 years. For the remainder of the term, I think this term is left with about 16 months before we go to local government elections, and then we have the new administration that will come in. So our argument and our proposition to council was that for the next 10 years, we have to focus on infrastructure. And of course, infrastructure across the 4 different services so that we are able to support the sustainability of the city. So as a result, Chair, we are actually moving hard with that. I think the working groups that the President announced 2 weeks ago will be focusing on infrastructure, because we believe without the solid infrastructure, we are unable to build such a sustainable city. Program Director, I can announce to you that this weekend there is a proposal with the private sector on how to redevelop our parks as sustainable infrastructure. The CEO is currently sitting with a number of agreements that we are signing with the private sector on how to redevelop the parks, but make them more sustainable, more open to the communities, because communities also have to look after our green infrastructure that we put in, and it's important to re-emphasize that point. So together with other African cities, financiers, global bodies and banks, Johannesburg is prepared to collaboratively explore sustainable levers in financing, including more federal lending options. We are currently working with the German Financing Bank to look at how to support our infrastructure. And in that regard, Chairperson and Program Director, we are happy to announce that the City of Johannesburg will be leading in the infrastructure and greening infrastructure through the Infrastructure Asset Program that Council has approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping perfect timing. That was great, and I think it really opened up this idea of the need for partnerships. We cannot get things done alone. We need to work with public sector, private sector, and the communities to make sure that things actually happen. So our next introductory speaker is good friend Beryl Kanile from UN Habitat. Beryl, if you'd like to join me. She is currently leading the Kenya country program for UN Habitat. She's also the chief technical advisor for the Pinwa project. Come on, I'll finish introducing you, don't be shy. And basically she leads this Pinwa project funded by the EU, working together with the Kenya government to actually improve housing and sustainable urbanization strategies in Kenya. So, Beryl, you also have 5 minutes, so.
Good morning, happy people. Good morning, thank you very much. I really am blessed to be here with that day into this meaningful conversation. I think the acting city manager has really covered the basis of what is crucial and key, particularly from the city lens. I think we can all agree that urban forest provides essential environment and socio-economic functions. I think on the conversations that we've had over the past 2 days, really that came out and it stands out very clear. But also from where I'm sitting, particularly taking from some of the solutions that have been presented, we can also say that managing trees as assets does involve a systematic approach that is required so that we can frame and we can understand how do we optimize the long-term value of trees. And however, this function comes with challenges, particularly in managing competing priorities. We all talking about the urban space here, and we all know that there are austerity measures. And it's good that today we're really breaking down how to establish a compelling business case so that we can be able to target various components. I think what is key to it as well is really to look at the governance framework and the regulations that present enabling environment. And many times in government, this doesn't sit entirely as mandate of cities or local government. It really is, the regulation is sort of imposed from national and regional governments. So as UN Habitat, there's various ways we work direct with cities, and in the context of us trying to leapfrog and making sure that we achieve the sustainable component of the agenda, we utilize many platforms, not only ourselves together with our sister agencies. There's UNDP, we work a lot with UNEP in this instant, lobby power, and we have access to member states. I think we do that through UNHA, UN Habitat Assembly, which is happening in May. And we develop guidelines to actually access member states and really, moreover, to actually amplify this agenda and see how we can establish bankable programs and implement it accordingly. We emerging from the WOOF, we utilize that platform, Pacts of the Future. We're managing the outcome of the Summit of the Future that was held. We're currently busy with the Quality of Life Initiative, which really centralize this particular agenda, but importantly, linking with some of the national-led agenda. It's important that we apply our technical assistant to make sure that the capacitation tools are directed to city, both from a normative and an operational perspective. And we would like to see, coming out of here, how we structure the donor outreach plan, and those are some of the key components that we work with urban spaces and assist them, and resource mobilization as a roadmap. What currently is happening from the UN Habitat, we're establishing a country office, which is going to be based in Pretoria, I think, which is quite crucial to the support of the Southern Africa components. This is how we work. So it's very much important that we then unpack what is it that we have to unlock. What are the lock-ins? As I've stated, from a political economy, how do we break down some of the bottlenecks that will enable us to actually achieve this agenda and spring out the significance of urban greening as an asset? Trees are assets, just like we take time to establish inventories in terms of our assets, our pipes, and everything in between. And trees are assets, and the value chains of how the asset management life cycle, when it comes to trees, we don't normally thought of that. But essentially, if we work in the entire value chain, we'll understand what is required to sustain and to maintain trees, and how do we plan from an urban planning lenses to incorporate this agenda of trees. As I've stated, the urban planning is quite key for us to unlock, and most importantly, to deal with our fragmented regulations that actually prevents us at times, synergize the vertical integration of how we regulate the spaces of urban greening, and how do we simplify the language when we work with our communities. Many times we talk of climate resilient, sustainable greening, sustainable infrastructure, and many other languages that are not simple. So for us, I think we're looking forward to actually establish and ensure that, am I blowing too much? And ensure that what comes out of these incredible speakers and incredible experts that are part of the panel, it's actually rich information that will take us to how we build compelling business cases, how we practicalize it, how we simplify the language, and how we make sure that our resource mobilization strategy can actually support and access urban spaces directly. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Before the panel. Thank you very much, Beryl. And once again, it's the shiny, happy people, so we have to have REM in the background here to get the good day going. So we thank you again for the welcoming remarks. Now we're going to start the work proper, and we're going to have a keynote intervention on a mapping study of urban green and climate finance. And we have pleasure to have with us two colleagues from the WITS Business School Center. We have Melody Mandavere, or Mandavia, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, who's a distinguished researcher and lecturer at the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, CAPSI, if I get it correctly. And together with her is going to be Dr. Sylvester Harvey, or Hovey, who's a postdoc researcher also at WITS Business School. So if you can join me on the stage, the floor is yours. I'm not sure how you're going to do it, but please.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me from this angle. I believe I'm the tallest person over here, but I need to confirm. Yeah. So thank you very much for the introduction. So we want to give a brief presentation on urban green and climate finance with a focus on African cities. This is an ongoing project. So the first phase of this project is to, first of all, conduct a survey from the literature to understand the state of knowledge when it comes to climate financing in urban areas. And the second phase, which we are now starting, is to engage with the various stakeholders throughout Africa to understand the situation within this context. What are some of the key interventions that are being put in place? What are some of the resources we require to promote urban climate financing, and also the challenges and some of the measures that needs to be put in place to address the challenges that we are going through. So as we've all heard throughout this conference, the common theme is all about how we can promote green finance and urban forestry in Africa. And why is this important? We believe it is due to the adverse impact that climate change is having on the planet. We see several effects in terms of how it is affecting air quality, human health, the quality of life, and even our ecosystem. This suggests that several interventions need to be put in place to mitigate the adverse impact that climate change is actually having on the planet. Now, scientific evidence also points to the fact that urban areas contribute greatly to climate change and are also greatly affected by climate change. For instance, a report by the McAllen Foundation highlights that 80% of greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from urban areas. And a similar report can be found in the IPCC's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which also states that more than 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from urban areas. This suggests that the urban areas or cities need to be the focus in terms of the policies, strategies, and actions that are required to mitigate this situation. More so, we find that the situation is getting worse in Africa, considering the rapid urbanization that is happening on this continent. So if you look at the figure on your extreme right, you will see the rate of urbanization in Africa. And we see that it is somewhere close to 50%. However, this is likely to increase in the near future, looking at the rate of increase. And we heard from Prof. Tolu yesterday, who highlighted that in the next 60 years, more than 1 billion of the African population will be in urban areas. Whilst this is good for productivity, growth, and development, it also has several adverse impacts on the climate. A current report highlighted that more than 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions are from urban areas, particularly in Africa. And so if this urban population continues to increase at a faster rate in the near future, then what is going to happen? Obviously, our contribution to the issue of climate change is also going to increase. So what does this suggest? It tells us that we need to put in appropriate measures, bring together resources to promote green financing in urban areas. So from the literature survey that we conducted, there were some few highlights that we would want to share with you, which would also set the tone for the panel discussion we're going to have this morning. So some of the issues I would want to run through with my colleague is to understand the global trends in urban green financing and the percentage of this investment in Africa, and which sectors are receiving most of these support. What are some of the challenges, the key actors that would help in the resource mobilization, and some of the global best practices that could also be adopted in Africa to help achieve this goal? So from the literature, we find out that now investment in urban green finance is on the increase. We see that the investment we had in 2017-2018 was around $376 billion, and that is, and in 2021-2022 we had $830 billion. So we see that right from 2017 to 2022, there has been more than 100% increase in urban green financing. However, we see that most of these money is invested into mitigation rather than adaptation, as can be seen in the other graph. Whilst considering that mitigation measures is important, we also need to understand that several efforts must be put in place to also curb the issue of what? Adaptation, in terms of building resilience against any adverse impact that climate change may pose in our cities. Now, another thing we found out was that even though the investment in urban green finance is on the increase, just a small amount of this is coming to Africa. So if you look at the result over here in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, we have around $5.49 billion in 2021-2022 investment, which is among the lowest compared to the other regions in the world. So it tells us that there is a huge gap between African cities and our global counterparts. Hence, African cities are being left behind in the global green economy transition. This is a great concern. And the question that arises is, how do we break this cycle? What sort of interventions are required? Who should be the key players in this? Should it only be the government, or it must be all hands on deck? These are some of the issues that we want to delve into by engaging with the various stakeholders on the African continent. Now, before I hand over to my colleague, I just also want to highlight the various areas where these funds are being channeled into. So if you look at the sectorial distribution, we see that the majority of this fund goes into transport. And we see that recently a lot of countries or cities are encouraging electric vehicles. Now, the second one is building and infrastructure, where we see most cities encouraging the use of solar panels. And then we also have energy systems. However, the other sectors have received less investment. Even though we understand that the transport sector, building and infrastructure are contributing greatly to greenhouse gas emissions, we cannot also overlook the contribution of the other sectors. They are all important. And if we want to promote green forest in Africa, then we demand a holistic approach by addressing the issues that are being posed by each of these sectors to ensure that the overall goal of ensuring that Africa remains sustainable and emits low carbon is achieved. At this moment, I will hand over to my colleague to continue.
Good morning, everyone, and all protocols duly observed. Thank you, Sophister. I'll continue starting on the key actors in mobilizing and implementing urban green financing. So as you can see, all those are the actors that are expected to play a great role in mobilizing and implementing green financing. The civil society and the local communities through advocacy and project co-implementation, the government agencies, those are the ministries and local governments, the development banks, the green climate funds and global climate initiatives, also the private sector. However, from our study and the preliminary findings that we have, what we have seen so far is that the government agencies are the ones that are playing a key role. Most of the projects are being funded by the government agencies. They are the ones that are funding the local municipalities. Over and above that, the development banks are also funding some of the projects. It is also important to note that so far from our findings, we realized that the private sector is not playing a key role, at least from our findings from the data that we've collected. We don't have collaborations between the city and the private sector. What are the constraints that we have in green financing? So here we have constraints that are being realized from the literature, from the world over, and also these are being realized even in our African cities. The economic constraints, limited financial resources, weak borrowing power, insufficient revenue generation. We also have institutional and regulatory challenges, social and political factors. Over and above these challenges or constraints, from our findings, we also managed to come up with these constraints that are being realized in urban green financing from city officials. The first one is capacity building, where we realized that there seems to be lack of capacity within city officials on fundraising and resource mobilization. That quote is from one of our participants who said there is a need to build capacity, most importantly in proposal writing, fundraising in general, to help improve the sector. So there's need to build capacity within city officials. That's one of the constraints. The other one is based on resource mobilization, where we notice that resource mobilization is mainly being handled through government-to-government negotiations. And the challenge in this is that normally these are not well coordinated, and it results in lengthy and bureaucratic processes which impact negatively on the timelines, resulting in misalignment of the timelines. You will notice that on the planning paper, a project would have been planned to be done maybe in 6 months, but on paper it would take maybe a year for it to be approved. That's one of the challenges. The other challenge again on resource mobilization is lack of proactiveness on city officials. What we noticed is that city officials, they don't go out looking for unsolicited funds. They wait for calls for proposals. They wait for the government to do it for them. In fact, they feel that it is not in their purview to mobilize resources, and that's a challenge. The other one is on public-private partnership financing, where we also noticed, I mentioned it in my previous slide, where we noticed that currently there's so limited activeness in the public-private partnerships financing. The private sector is not well understood, especially by those who are supposed to be implementing the projects, as indicated by limited collaborations between the city and the private sector. It is important to note that the private sector can play an important role in unlocking finances through various projects, even through their corporate social investments or corporate social responsibility projects. The other constraint that we noticed was on priorities and goals, misaligned priorities and goals between the city and the government or the ministry. A good example that we can give is about Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo. From what we noticed, Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo, they do prioritize greening activities. However, the same cannot be said about the city that's giving them. How do we notice that? From the budget that they are allocated by the main ministry, it's not reflecting the prioritiness of, it's not reflecting the priorities that are being handled by the Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo. The other one is on lack of coordination. It seems like there's no coordination between different government departments, and there's a need for clarity of roles and responsibilities between different stakeholders in different government ministries. For example, environment and forestry, finance, and other government departments. It would be very important to have a focal point person who's actually focusing on proposal writing, resource mobilization, so that the process can be shortened somehow, and also to try and avoid the bureaucratic process that are being recognized at the moment. What are the global best practices? the green bonds and climate resilient infrastructure funds. For example, the Johannesburg green bond, I think the city officials will explain that better. There's the blended finance models. There's municipal climate finance. That's our city level pooled finance initiatives. As I said before, we didn't notice much of that in our study, at least at the moment, because as my colleague said, this is an ongoing study. The capacity building and knowledge hubs, I've already talked about capacity building in city officials. So what are the initial snapshots? In conclusion, initial impressions from the literature review and interviews suggest that urban greening initiatives and access to climate finance in Africa remain critically low. And our findings highlight that there are significant challenges in resource mobilization for urban green spaces, particularly regarding funding dynamics and internal government coordination. While funding opportunities do exist, they often come with very complex demands for visibility and political mileage, which strain the city administrators. Additionally, the lack of proactive engagement of city officials undermines the efforts to secure sustainable funding. I've already alluded to that. There is also a limited understanding of the potential roles of the national development agencies and multilateral development banks, which results in missed opportunities for strategic partnerships and long-term suffering. City officials tend to believe that it's the duty of the government to do that, and they just sit and relax, waiting for the government to give them a way forward. I thank you.
Oops. Is my mic still working? Yes, thank you very much. Well, I think a lot of you will recognize the similar challenges and constraints in all your countries. Even in Italy, there's a lot of the same challenges and constraints. So you don't worry, you're not alone. Yeah? Now, to answer, or at least to try and see how some of these challenges and constraints will be addressed, we'll now be having a roundtable discussion on unlocking financial resources for urban forests. So how do we actually address these challenges? How can we make things happen? And we really like to thank the WITS CAPSI Center for this study. I think it's really a good, let's say, opening, and really helps us set the scene on what we can discuss in the following roundtable. So please join me in welcoming Professor Becky Moyo, who'll be moderating our roundtable or discussion. And he's the director of the Africa Center for Public Space and Social Investment at WITS Business School at the University of Witwatersrand. I think that's how it's pronounced. And he is known for his, let's say, the leadership, looking at really how you can reshape the continental narratives, and particularly on social investments and silver bonus. So please welcome Professor Moyo as we moderate the roundtable. And joining us on the stage for this discussion, we have Anne Quadrado Galardi from the African Development Bank. She's an urban development specialist. Please, Anna. We have Mr. Olympus Mantata, who's the head of the Climate and Environmental Finance of the Development Bank of South Africa. We have, thank you. We have Mr. Andre Oberholzer, who's the Group Head Corporate Affairs of the SAPI, the South African Pulp and Paper Industries Limited. We have Mr. Isaac Mugumbule, who's Supervisor Landscape of the Kampala City Authority. Isaac, are you here?
No.
Oh, you see it. Oh, you're going to be there instead. No? Isaac is missing. I thought he was here. Oh, well, what we do, he might appear. Then we have Ms. Nokutula Mene, who's a project management specialist at the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. And finally, Ms. Ronelle van Staden, who's an associate at Future World. Please, Ronelle, do this. Okay, you can join. Okay. Okay, and we also have an additional guest to replace Isaac, sorry, Motelli. Colisa, sorry, Motelli. You weren't added to my list. Things change so rapidly here. Okay, Professor
Okay.
Moyo, the floor is yours,
Thank
and
you.
you have about an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half,
Yeah.
if you can try and keep it tight.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I just want to start by
Tell me.
acknowledging the work that went into
Before
the
we
research that was
put the
done.
pass to the panel session.
You had two colleagues come up here to present, but I want to also make acknowledgement of two other colleagues who are in the room, Dr. Stele Muloy and Dr. Roland Musika, who are sitting up there. Maybe you could stand up so that colleagues can see you. So they are the joint authors of the report. But at the same time, we also got a lot of inputs from reviewers from different institutions that IANDA put together. I just think it's important for us to acknowledge the reviewers' comments as well as the people that the team is still continuing to interview and get data from. So this session is going to be looking at how city officials mainly and cities generally can unlock resources, mainly for issues that have to deal with climate financing, urban green forests, among others. And we are joined here in the stage by representatives of the private sector, government, representatives of financial institutions, the African Development Bank, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the United Nations. I'll introduce them as we go. But because it's a huge panel, I just think it's important for me to manage time. And so what I'm going to do is I will start by, you have their bios in the program. I will just mention who they are and what they do. I'm not going to read the entire bio. But I would like to start and give probably more time to our colleague Mtoteli from SALGA. He is the Chief Officer responsible for infrastructure delivery, spatial and transformation services, inclusive communities, and sustainability. And I want to start there because we're meant to be joined by the Deputy Minister. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. And we wanted to get a sense of how cities and governments in particular are finding it in terms of accessing financing for green financing as well as climate financing. And so I would give him a bit of more time so that he can lay out the background, but also the contextual challenges that we are facing. And I think the current context in which we are is characterized by declining foreign aid. So that's number one. Foreign aid is definitely declining, and currently we are even sitting in a situation where there's withdrawal of aid. It's not just the reduction, it's actually withdrawal of funding. And we are all familiar with what the US has just done, withdrawing from different institutions, but also withdrawing the funding that it has been giving to different countries. And so, Totel, I want to start with you and ask, what are the biggest challenges that are currently facing South African cities when it comes to accessing financing that is meant mainly for urban greening, urban forests, and climate financing?
Thank you, Prof. Good morning to fellow panelists, and good morning to everyone, all protocols observed. The first point I would want to make in relation to what are the constraints to accessing financing is that it is funding. That is the biggest constraint. And when I say that, people say, what do you mean? What do you mean funding is a constraint to accessing financing? Is that, at least in my mind, funding is a predictable stream of revenue or income that is coming to a particular function. That's about funding. Financing, then, you leverage that financing on the basis of that predictable stream of revenue. Let me make an example. If you have a water services, I'll come back to environment. If you have a water services function to provide water, you have a predictable stream of revenue that you collect as a result of delivering water. But that predictable stream of revenue may not give you, at the time you need, the financing to invest in the infrastructure that you need. But to leverage that stream of revenue, predictable revenue, to then engage the financiers to finance the infrastructure that we need. So in relation to urban greenery, environmental functions. We don't have that. Therefore, we are not able to approach financiers to finance because we can't indicate what is the stream of revenue that over time will pay back the financiers. So that is the primary, in my view, the primary constraint. And it comes from both the intergovernmental transfers and own revenue of municipalities. Intergovernmental transfers in the form of the funds that come from the fiscus to local government in order to fund the functions of local government. The construct of the intergovernmental transfers in South Africa is that fiscus funds functions that have been allocated to different spheres of governments by the Constitution. So the Constitution has schedules, Schedule 4 and Schedule 5, Part B of those lists the functions of local government. The environmental function is not one of those. So it's not an original function of local government. But then the Constitution says the relevant legislatures can then pass legislation. And in this case, it has happened in South Africa that the legislations that have been passed then delegate environmental functions to local government. But by that time, when that happens, already there is no way of getting funding to follow that kind of a delegation of the function from the legislation. So you have a limitation from the point of view of the fiscus following the function that is delegated by legislation into local government. So we've got to fix that from the point of view of the intergovernmental transfers. But then local government is funded both from the intergovernmental transfers and from its own local revenue in terms of rates, income, and as well as service charges. Now, what then you find that in the own revenue of local government, the possible funding source would be a portion of the rates income that municipalities are supposed to collect. But when you look at how loaded is the responsibilities to be funded from the rates income, there's almost nothing that you get for environmental functions. That then becomes something that must be solved within also the own revenue. That's the one part of the constraint that I want to deal with. The second part of the constraint then that face municipalities is that given what I've talked about of internal funding of government, then it's accessing external funding that flows into government. There are two, in my mind, two main constraints that makes it difficult for local government or for the cities. One is the budgeting process of cities, which is in the hands of leaders of cities. You see, the study was saying city officials don't fetch, they don't mobilize resources. They don't see it as their responsibility. I suppose that study is talking about city officials that are in line departments, such as line departments of environment. It's because of having been previously in my life a head of a department of environment in a city. What was most frustrating is that the process of budgeting is that all departments must submit their budgets to finance into some kind of a black box of finance, and then boom comes the outcome. Here is the amount you've been allocated. So as a head of department, you don't have either the responsibility or the opportunity to say this project can be funded from this source of funding, and this is my role in getting that source of funding into the city. So that's something that is in the hands of cities. Some of them have found ways, heads of departments, to overcome that, but it is not in the institutional structure and processes of cities to do that. Probably better when you have an entity, as in the case of the city of Joburg, because that entity can on its own as an entity go out and chase funding. The second one is that in relation to international flow of funds, whether it's climate response funds or green funds, whatever you may call them, there's appetite in international institutions and sometimes national institutions and national governments, to which these funds, international funds, are coming, to want to fund community projects. They want to go into a particular community and fund a project. Now, this is what we were saying in COP29 last year, that when you do that and bypass the government institution of the community, you then create a situation where there is a project that will be funded, but it will not be sustainable because there's no one who then receives this project and take the responsibility to make sure that it is sustained over a period of time. So that then becomes another one, in addition to our incapability to through our systems, leverage the networks that we create. Heads of environment and climate change in municipalities, through platforms such as this, they have networks that they have created, but those networks then they are not used into the budgeting process of municipalities to find funding. There are also constraints, as has been mentioned in the study, where even when you want to do that, you are now a CFO working out the budget. You want to leverage possible funding options from elsewhere, but you are not a subject expert to put a business case that will fetch funding. That's where the role of development institutions to support and capacity and just coordinate this in the institutions is to help to fetch. That's what we have said in many of the platforms. We then have to fetch projects from municipalities because there's work that needs to be done, but there's just this dealing of talking to finance institutions. So you need finance institutions that are hungry to fetch projects and support municipalities to do that. The last one, of course, that is a constraint that again is in the control of municipalities on what constrains municipalities is the financial management of municipalities. That is in the control of leaders of municipalities, because where the financial management that lead to bad audit outcomes is something that is common in that particular municipality, you find it difficult. Even if you have put together something, the financiers will say, but if we give you our money, if you don't have financial management systems, you've got bad audit outcomes, we don't trust that our money will be used appropriately. So leaders of municipalities, in solving the issues of audit and financial management, they are not just solving it for the municipalities, they are solving it for the municipality to be able to interact with financiers. Financiers will not fund a municipality that cannot prove that it's got systems to manage finances. So that becomes an important issue from the point of view of financial management. Maybe let me stop there.
Yeah, let me make a follow-up question, and I want to apologize. I butchered your name. It's Mtobeli, not Mtoteli. I think I said Mtobeli. Yes. So sorry about that. But let me make a follow-up question. So, I mean, given what you've just said, what are the strategies that currently cities are utilizing to actually mobilize resources of this nature, given the constraints that you have just laid out?
Thank you. The first one, which is what we're doing collectively as cities and this association of local government, is to convince, and which I think we have done so far, is to convince national government as a policymaker that the functions of local government compared to the functions of national and provincial governments are not funded equitably. The Constitution says fiscals must equitably fund the functions of government. We have done studies that show that that constitutional injunction is not being met currently. So the president of the country may have had during the State of the Nation address again affirmed that South Africa is in the process of reviewing the funding framework of local government to address the issue of the inadequate funding of local government functions by the fiscus. Of course, taking into account that local governments also have an opportunity to raise own funding. So that's the one thing that we are doing. We think that it should change the situation, and environmental functions will then be funded within that context as I explained what that is. The second one that cities are currently doing, recognizing this, that I was talking about the budgeting process and so on, is that heads of departments and institutions that are responsible for environmental functions and climate change are now themselves capacitating themselves to say, let's go, let's try and fetch this money. Despite the budgeting process that does not ask us to fetch the money, we have functions that we can build business case on and be able to go to our finance departments and say, I have been working with this institution. Here is an opportunity to fund. This is what it requires from our institutions. So we've got examples of cities that are doing that. For example, the city of Cape Town, they worked with the Nature Conservancy to mobilize, just as an example, 50 million to clear invasive species in some of the areas of Cape Town. And it's been a great project. You have also cases of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa that has gone out to mobilize funding internationally. And because the heads of environment are working with the department, we are able to, in working with the department, be able to source funding that would come to the institution. So working closely with departments that are they have access to international funds is one of the options. The other ones is own revenue of municipalities. Many of our cities have nature areas, protected nature areas, that the public uses. So we're raising revenue from those protected areas. If you were to think about a city such as Tshwane, the capital city, at some point we had more than 17 large-scale protected areas that the public is utilizing, Groenkloof, Rietvlei, and so on and so on. Those, when you manage the revenue that is generated from visiting those areas, it then gives you a funding that you can then utilize. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We're addressing both the policy situation, but also acting in the context of the municipality. Yes, work still has to be done, just to get our municipalities in their medium-term financing plans, to be able to say a fraction, this particular percentage of our budget will go to this function. That creates a funding stream that we can then utilize to leverage financing. Because if you do that, you can improve your protected areas, and when you improve your protected areas, you can get more revenue. Then that starts to solve your problems. So where you have entities such as city parks and zoos in Johannesburg, for example, to be able to give them a predictable stream, a reasonable predictable stream of funding from the city would help an institution like that to be able to then leverage financing, which financing will improve its revenue-raising capabilities. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And I'm sure if we do get some time, we'll probably want to hear from other African cities whether the same challenges that have been raised here also apply and resonate. But the study also mentioned that there are different actors in the ecosystem, and I want to turn now to some of those actors that are involved in one way or the other. And Annie, I want to come to you. You are an urban specialist, development specialist within the African Development Bank. Maybe talk to us about the funding priorities that the ADB has in relation to climate resilience and urban development.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to start thanking everyone involved in the organization of this forum. Ayanda, thank you for your patience these days. So, together with OECD and Cities Alliance, we launched a couple of weeks ago a report on Africa's urbanization dynamics. It said that by 2050, 2 out of 3 Africans will live in cities. So urbanization is happening at a speed and a scale that we have never seen before. And this brings an unprecedented opportunity, but also a profound challenge. Therefore, we cannot afford to be reactive, and we need to help our cities to be investment ready, resilient, and inclusive, as Lord Mayor Lowe was highlighting yesterday. At the African Development Bank, we are committed to helping cities to be better planned, developed, and managed. And we do that through, well, first of all, urban infrastructure investments in sectors like transport, energy, housing, and climate adaptation, of course. Also through innovative financial mechanisms to try to help cities to access capital markets and to build public-private relationships. And finally, through capacity building and policy support to improve urban governance frameworks and help cities to be more efficient and investment-friendly.
So, great to hear that, but then how do cities position themselves to access that funding, including the instruments that we have? I know, when it comes to the bank, there's always an issue around, is your project bankable? How do they position themselves to access that?
Okay, so in 2018, the board of directors of the bank approved the non-sovereign operations policy that allows the bank to lend directly to decentralized entities. These are towns, cities, and local governments. But although we can lend directly to cities, there are several factors that prevent them to access financing. Some have been already stated this morning. So first of all, we see that many African cities have limited own source revenues and rely heavily on national government transfers. Also, as the bank, we still assess the credit risk of the cities. So if the city lacks a strong financial track record or clear mechanisms to secure the repayment of the loan, it will be difficult to access this financing. And I want to highlight this third one because even though we would like to lend directly to cities, in many countries, local governments do not have the legal framework to borrow without the central government approval. So national laws may restrict cities from taking on debt. Then we see that there is a lack of technical and managerial capacity. This means that many cities lack experience on project structuring, meeting financial requirements, and managing debt. And lastly, we receive a lot of projects that are just not well structured. So they're not structured enough to justify the financing process. But all of this, we're trying to overcome these problems by also putting aside some grants that cities can access. For example, in 2019, we established the Urban and Municipal Development Fund, which is also a co-financier for this event. And we give up to $1 million USD grants for technical assistance and capacity building projects on urban development. That can mean urban planning projects, urban governance, municipal finance. And not only this fund, if you go to our annual reports, at the very bottom, there's a list of all of the funds that we collaborate with and that you can access through us. So anyways, I'll be around the whole day and I'll be happy to tell you more about the bank, how we work, how you can access financing from us, and please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I know we'll have time maybe to also open up for the conversation more questions might actually come from the floor. But I want to move on now to Olympus, who is the head of Climate and Environmental Finance at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. I think similar questions to you, Olympus, but in a more different manner. So in your case, I mean, you could spell out what the funding priorities are, but at the same time, what are the promising climate finance mechanisms that cities can tap into when it comes to the bank?
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. I think this is quite an important discussion, and I think we talked to a number of cities around these particular pressures and trying to find ways to respond to that. So I'll just touch some of the key things that I think are important, at least from our end. I guess one of the key issues that we have been looking at from a DBSA point of view is really to leverage on our accreditation to a number of UN convention-based financing mechanisms, such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility, to really look at using concessional financing and blending that with our own resources or other people's resources to support these very important initiatives. So I think it is quite clear that public financing is limited in terms of the needs that are out there. And therefore, what is important is to use the limited public resources in an innovative way that helps you to leverage private financing at scale. And I think, it is quite important to do that. So for us, in how we mobilize these climate resources, we tend to look at building facilities that are specifically looking at unlocking private sector in a way that de-risk projects and make it easy for their participation. But we aren't limited to that. We are also cognizant of the fact that there are projects that sometimes don't really lend themselves towards private participation. And we also try to use the resources that we have available to unlock that. And I think it's important to mention. In addition to that, within the bank, we look at various green concessional credit lines that we try to use to support, especially cities and generally municipalities. And this we try to look, of course, you look at the cost of financing to make sure that you get the right pricing for that. But maybe even more importantly, going to look at how you structure that, especially with maybe long-term financing, just to make things a little more practical. But somebody, I think, earlier mentioned also the important interventions, especially around green bonds and maybe generally more sustainable bonds, so supporting where that is concerned. But we have recently been looking at a number of initiatives around outcomes bonds. And we think that is promising, especially where, urban greening is concerned, biodiversity conservation, and generally the delivery of ecosystem services. But I'm sure, many people hear a lot about, what could be done around the carbon market. I mean, we know the pricing of carbon sometimes can be, volatile. But I think there's promising developments in that regard, and that could potentially be a revenue stream that could be looked at, going forward. I've also been involved a lot recently around, biodiversity financing. So there's a lot of discussions around that, especially within a number of development banks within the finance in common, grouping from a DBSA point of view, we are also part of the International Development Finance Club, so there's lots of discussions and a lot of initiatives that are coming up there. I think some of the interventions have been mentioned already, but I just want to conclude by saying, I do agree that, you need significant financing to move the needle. But sometimes I think it's important to realize that even where financing is available, we still struggle with having projects that are correctly packaged to take advantage of that financing. So sometimes I think it's counterproductive to be looking at increasing financial flows that we know are needed if we are not going to have projects that are ready to take that up. And that takes us back to a whole question around talking to ensuring that we have the right capacity in place to be able to take advantage of that. And I hope I'll have more opportunity to talk to that later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I want to ask another question before we move on. But I also think that because we are getting so much information, and I worry that we have a huge panel, the audience might actually end up not getting the questions that they want to ask. So I will ask one question and then come to the audience just to take one or two questions on things that have been said so far. But I think you started alluding to it. So these are instruments that might sound easily accessible on your part, but when it comes to cities and city officials, this might be something that requires capacity strengthening on the one hand, but also capacity absorption on the other. So how do cities leverage these instruments, and how do they get themselves ready to actually work with you on these instruments?
So what we have found important on our side, especially working with municipalities, is really understanding how you intervene at different stages of the, if you like, funding value chain. So if a municipality is going to approach, let's say, a DBSA at a later stage with a project that is not well positioned to try to attract climate financing, that could be a serious problem. So what we try to do to compensate for that is we started a very early stage with municipality at the planning stage, just to make sure that from a planning point of view that we know will result in infrastructure plans. We start inculcating key considerations that are useful in unlocking the right pots of funds. And in that regard, it becomes, how can I put it? You are being proactive in terms of the early stages that fits into a pipeline development. I think that is quite key. Then further to that, then we look at the issues around capacity development. Capacity development, I'm tempted to give examples, but I don't think time allows. I would have loved to do that, but that is key. Then moving on from that, project preparation becomes quite key also for us. That very important component of making sure that we assist municipalities in transitioning their projects from typically feasibility towards the dreaded word bankability, but really the importance of walking that journey to get to that point is quite key. And when that is done properly, then you have the outcomes that are ready for funders to really be prepared to finance. Yeah. And I think for us, thinking about the whole funding value chain is quite key, and making sure that you have appropriate interventions at the required stages.
Thank you. So can I just take two or so questions so that there's a hand up there. I don't know if there's a mic that could get there. And then another hand there. So I think while they are running for the mic, can I just give you this one?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My comment is with the first speaker. I maybe can't pronounce the name very well. About income-generating activities within the cities. I just want to give a quick example about Nairobi and the Karura Forest. The Karura Forest is, for those who are here on the first day, is one of the forests that was saved by Professor Wangari Maathai But what I want to give is the statistics of how much money they make. On a monthly basis, they have between 60 and 70,000 visitors, local and international, going to walk, going to have picnics and stuff like that. And they pay. Each visitor pays something, a minimum amount. As of today, they have more visitors than the Nairobi National Park, which used to be the leading, and they have more visitors than the internationally known Masai Mara Game Reserve. Just because they have maintained the forest in a very, very nice way, and they pay for themselves. It's self-sustaining. It's managed by Friends of Karura and the Kenya Forestry Department. So the Kenya Forestry Department is making money out of the forest, which would not have been there had people not fought for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask that you just ask the question, because we really don't have much time and I still have 4 people to speak.
Thank you.
There was a hand up there.
Yes,
then
I was number 3. I'm very aware of that. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. I think what will be crucial to understand, based on what has been said, particularly by the development banks, is that Mtobeli spoke about the significance of fetching the money. The important is that what is coming up here is safeguards. And we understand from a banking perspective, there are safeguards in what will be capabilities for recovery, particularly in the loan component, maybe not the grant component. It is how do we enable the space and to ease that process, and how that becomes an issue that cities, particularly secondary cities, can actually be assisted, because on a day-to-day basis, there is not a generically capacitation of practitioners such as UMD here to actually understand those safeguards and how those safeguards could be eased without dealing with the reputation. So there are many complexities around this fetching the money, and there are many tools that exist, and how those are linked already with some of the development partners that can actually assist to ease the safeguards that are existing, because it becomes impossible for cities to access some of those particular funding. And I'm very blessed to actually have an office tucked into the Karura Forest, so I'm one of the friends of the forest, just saying.
Okay, let's have one question from there.
My questions was that there are any resources that are directed in the Department of Basic Education so that we can bridge the gap of neglecting the forest and the awareness? And are there any resources in capacitating the youth, the unemployed youth, maybe by providing the short courses? There are graduates which are nature conservators, they are from health awareness, those different courses, but how are there any ways or platforms where they can access the funds to participate in these projects? And how are there any ways, innovative ways, in which we can increase the mass platforms and advertise it more on media, on social media platforms, where young people, they can be capacitated as the future generation in order to bridge this gap and be innovative and more resilient? And is there any plan, any specific plan, guideline, protocol or policies specifically where the Department of Basic Education, Urban Forestry, and African Forum, where they are helping the schools, especially the quintile 1 schools and the underprivileged youth?
Okay, thank you so much. I think any of you who wants to, I mean, from the previous speakers, if you want to take just sound bites, because I think you'll have more time to address these questions during the networking sessions. If any one of you wants to take, I'll come to you after. I just want to check from the African Bank and the Development Bank as well. Anything from you? Okay, good.
No, I just wanted to respond to the last question that has just been posed. And I wanted to highlight a program that we are currently working on with DFFE. Is really not necessarily specifically addressed to the department, as you have mentioned, but is positioned for youth, and it's really around capacitation of youth, but also youth businesses in the space that are coming up, seeing and how to capacitate them and also to fund them and to provide seed funding for the start of those businesses. We're just finalizing that. I'm sure you'll see that in the being advertised in the news in a short while. So maybe you can look out for that. Thanks.
Okay, great. Just a minute.
Yeah. Myself, I will address your question. So maybe we have a team of municipal finance experts that would probably answer this question much better. But I know that they have been working a lot on trying to improve credit, trying to improve credit risk of the cities, and they have actually undertaken a lot of missions during this past year to try to work on changing the policies and enabling the laws to actually help the cities to access to these capital markets. And from our side, from the urban development team, we are helping more on the preparatory phases so that projects will be better structured, but also that cities understand what their real priorities are. So when they come towards us, they are much more bankable projects that we get.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's move on to Andre, who is the head of corporate affairs at SAPI Limited. I had lots of questions, but I think I would just say to you, you heard what the study was saying about the private sector. How can the private sector, yourselves included as SAPI, be involved in creating this atmosphere and environment for cities to actually access this kind of funding for green financing, urban forest development, among others? But also, if you can share any successful partnerships that SAPI has entered into that can serve as models for this green financing, that would help. And of course, if you want to respond to that, then you can do that.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for also allowing the private sector a small segment to contribute. And I think it is, when I looked at the program, I mean, it's a massive program. And when I did some research in preparing for today, I mean, the amount of writing and research and reports globally that's available on urban forestry is just absolutely amazing. And the fact that we as a forestry company are not fully aware of all of that, I think just goes to show that in general, it's a message that we constantly try and have as a multinational, as an African multinational that's invested in the rest of the world, is that basic connection, the basic conversations between the private sector companies who are looking beyond just their own interest. There are a huge amount of companies that are looking at their role as a corporate citizen, that understand that the work they do contributes to the betterment of society. But the basic conversations between all the academic institutions, all the research institutions, some of the multilateral institutions, and the private sector is still not an open, big highway of conversation. So I think that's the first thing, just fundamentally. It doesn't matter what topic you think about. That is still a problem, is that when you arrange things, when you think about talking to people, when you think about doing studies, when municipalities think about talking, there's lots of private sector actors who are prepared to have that conversation. They're never approached. So they will go knock on doors, but it works two ways. So that's an open invitation to everyone here to actually engage more and have those basic conversations with the private sector and see what comes from those conversations. The worst thing is to have a conversation only when there's a crisis, or is only when you're in trouble, only when you need money. That's the worst time to have the conversation, because there's no trust, there's no relationship, there's no common understanding of priorities. So I think that's sort of the first general message. For us as a company, obviously we're forest products, so trees are our life. We use wood fiber, we beneficiate it, and our company only survives if there's strong biodiversity. Yes, we have a commercial crop, but that crop isn't healthy if there isn't a biodiverse ecosystem around it. And so therefore we think about trees, the value of trees, the value of agroforestry, the value to our communities. And it's interesting that when we speak, so we've now started an initiative with the Africa Forest Forum and with some other people in Africa. Forestry as a business, forestry has no value in Africa. That's a basic message for us that we're trying to communicate, is that you only protect what you value. You only protect what has value to you. You only not only protect it, but you then invest in it, you build it, you become innovative around it. So in a general sense, looking at urban forestry is important, but urban forestry will always have a problem if forestry in general is not valued. If there isn't an understanding of the critical role that commercial forestry, that the utilization, the sustainable utilization of forestry and of land and of nature in the rural areas won't have, because otherwise you'll be dealing with a denuded rural landscape and everyone will rush to the cities, and now you're trying to solve it through urban forestry. It's critical to address urban forestry, but it's part of a broader puzzle. You shouldn't forget to make sure that people understand the value of trees, the value of the natural environment. Not to protect it and just look at it, but to actually utilize it to generate good communities. So there is something. In South Africa itself, we have a footprint that means that we engage with 60 municipalities. And in those municipalities, there are cities, there are towns, big towns and small towns. So we actually have a massive engagement, and most of that engagement is framed to some extent with frustration. So that because basic services aren't being delivered, the support that we require for firefighting isn't being delivered, the maintenance of infrastructure. So now those towns and cities come to us to do nice urban greening projects. And we're going, but the basic relationship that we want to have isn't one of mutual respect. So echoing what some other people are saying is the private sector is looking for partnerships. Maybe not the whole private sector, but we don't need to worry about the guys that don't have the big picture. Work with the people that have the big picture. But it's got to be mutual, that sort of a mutual respect, because from there, remember, our staff live in those communities. Our staff live in these cities. We want our staff to have a healthy city life, to have a healthy environment within which they operate. So it is in our looking beyond just the, let's say, the macro issues. If you bring it back to the people who live there, it's investing in their future, it's investing in their health. When we get to one of the other approaches for us as a company is we don't do for people, we do with people. And that's the asset-based community development model, which is critical if you want to create credibility with the private sector. Show what you are doing and then ask for help and ask for additional facilitation, advice, expertise. But don't come to the private sector and say, I've done nothing, but I want your money to start doing something.
Yeah.
That's just not sort of the right way of doing it.
I will ask you to...
Alignment of timelines. Very often, something like urban forestry is a long-term. It's fundamentally long-term. Growing trees is long-term. Establishing, maintaining the urban forest is long-term. When we look at municipal budgets, as has been said, there's no mention. When we look at the priorities of local government or cities, we look for, but where is this topic in the list of priorities? If it's not there, you're getting a mismatch of messaging. When you're also looking at getting project proposals, if they're all short-term and not long-term, so we're looking for what's that long-term commitment, that long-term partnership. Two projects, or one project, one commitment. Interesting, in South Africa, the private sector, the big business group, decided to establish what's called the South African SME Fund for small and micro enterprises. We bought shares in a company. That money is there forever. That money is invested, and it's then invested to generate small businesses. when I look at how some other funding is done, there's endowments. So you establish an endowment, there's funding, let's say CSI philanthropy money that comes into the endowment. Only the interest is used for projects. I never hear anyone talk about that kind of funding model.
So, Andrea, I'll actually have to move on because we only have 15 minutes. So maybe we might get some time, maybe during networking break, to share more of the insights.
So just one last message. Ownership. We've learned through our pepperbark or the Warburgia project, which we've established in South Africa. It's a rare and threatened and endangered species, where we said, okay, we'll use our forestry technology to help re-establish the tree. How did we do that? Well, we used our commercial technology to do that, but we took partnerships with the local sangomas, or the traditional healers. And we didn't just plant the trees, we distribute the trees to them, because the trees have medicinal value. So the product has value. And we make sure that we only do projects where there's community ownership, which was something that someone mentioned earlier as well. If you don't have local community owners that you can work with, there's no sustainability. So getting to higher education or basic education, we've looked at projects with schools. We try and go out and do some lectures or so on. But if there isn't local ownership, so who looks after the trees during school holidays? It's that kind of thing that you first have to figure that out. Once you do that through local ownership, through local community ownership, then projects actually start working.
So what I could say also is to ask the audience to check out Trialogue. Last year I served on the panel that adjudicated for the CSI Strategic Award, which was given to SAPI, and in that there's a write-up that talks about your involvement with schools and communities. But I'm not opening it up for Andre.
If I could just abuse my time from Trialogue. Only 44% of companies in South Africa, so all companies give CSI, only 44% give money to the environment. Of that 44%, only 5% is for the environment. Of that 5%, only 7% is for urban greening. So getting the prioritization of these topics just on the agenda, that's the first battle.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to Nokuthula. You are with the United Development Program, and you have just had a lot of challenges, opportunities, instruments that are available. For the audience and for the cities, what role does the UNDP play in helping cities actually access financing that might be related to biodiversity, green financing, urban forests, among others?
Thank you very much. So, as mentioned, my name is Nokuthula Mina. I work for the United Nations Development Program, South Africa Country Office, and the United Nations is the development arm of United Nations Development Program is the development arm of the United Nations. And I think we've heard a lot around, the role of own revenue from municipalities around financing environmental programs as a source of green finance. But I just want to pick up perhaps from where Andre and Olympus have touched on around the role of private sector finance. I think when we started off working around issues of nature finance, green finance, climate finance, it was largely a public good and something that should be financed from the public purse. Increasingly, we now have a realization that all actors have a role to play, and including the private sector. And when I speak of the private sector, I'm not only talking about CSIR, which is mandated in the country, but I'm actually talking about the role that all actors, including private sector, have a role to play in maintenance and, emancipation of the environmental agenda. I just want to touch on the fact that there's been a steady growth in private sector finance around the green industry, around the green agenda generally, and the achievement of SDGs. South Africa is one of the largest capital markets in the world. A lot of asset owners are in this country. We've got one of the largest banks, some of the largest banks who also have a footprint across the African continent. So the banking sector is quite big. We've got a huge private sector that commands a lot of money. However, we are not adequately tapping into this private sector or this capital markets in order to be able to finance the green agenda. There's 3 important shifts that have happened perhaps over the past 10 years within the development agenda. One has been around the broadening of the common agenda to include social, economic, and alongside the environment. The second is a shift towards the urgency in tackling not only climate change, but also the nature agenda, and private sector embracing the issue of double materiality. And so within that as well comes the issue of mobilizing private finance as fundamental in the achievement of our work. The United Development Programme has established what we call the Sustainable Finance Sector Hub, which is based in New York, but we also have an Africa Finance Sector Hub, which is based here in South Africa. And part of the work around this is actually to be able to try and see to what extent can we capitalize on the capital markets, to what extent can we capitalize on the private banks that are within the country for the Africa-wide benefit of the green agenda. But in order to be able to tap into this, one of the issues that we've seen from an Africa perspective is the lack of a conducive policy environment. I think a lot of actors here have already mentioned to the fact that, private sector, it's about the bottom line most of the time. Of course, we've got the CSIR, but it's money in, money out. Have we actually managed to present the issues of biodiversity as an asset class where money in and money can go out? Municipalities effectively able to present that as custodians. That's one. Number 2, there's the issues around which are also happening at a global level, but I'm glad that South Africa through the G20 is also taking it up, is around the cost of capital, right? We've spoken a lot about risk insofar as it is concerned, but the study also showed that out of the capital flows that are going to green finance issues, Africa is getting the least, and we need to ask ourselves why. It is because of the perceived risk and the cost of capital that is then attached to green finance, especially in form of loans that are coming to the African continent and for municipalities as well. So that is something that needs to be addressed, and those are conversations at a policy level that UNDP is involved in and is starting to work. I just want to I know you're short of time, so I'll add just one more point. Part of the stuff or work that we've done, especially from a Biodiversity Finance Initiative, is around working with banks. In the Philippines, here in South Africa, for example, we've got, I think most of you have these apps with these banks where you do this and then you get a free coffee maybe from X company or Y company. In the Philippines, we partnered with a bank. Through the same app, as you transact, you can choose, instead of getting a free coffee, you can then choose to put that money towards a tree. And you see your tree growing. As your tree grows, the bank then takes that money at the end of the year and invests it in planting an urban forest or an urban reforestation. I don't know what that is, but yeah.
It's actually saying time up, but we have some time that we've been given. So continue. Yeah.
Okay, so that initiative does not cost the bank anything. We're actually leveraging the consumer to be able to. So instead of giving it for a free coffee, why do we not leverage? But those conversations, they need to happen. The government also needs to put in place de-risking mechanisms, and banks like the DBSA and ETC, that's their role, to be able to work with government to put in place de-risking mechanisms for the private sector to be able to embark on such initiatives that basically don't cost the private sector anything. But at the same time, we need to hold private sector account. Whilst we want to de-risk the investment, we must hold them accountable. They're also playing a part in destruction or propagating the catastrophic situation that we find ourselves in, and so that investment from them is needed. So it's time for us to actually be able to leverage that. So leverage public own revenue, but at the same time, let's have a discussion around how we leverage the capital markets, the banks, the businesses, and ETC, the financial institutions that are here, in order to build the green finance agenda.
Thank you so much. We actually reserved the best for last. So Ronel, an associate with Future International, you heard, I think Olympus started speaking a bit to issues of carbon credits. And I just want to ask you to speak to us about how African cities can effectively integrate carbon credits into their broader sustainable financing strategies. But at the same time, if you have time to also talk to us about how cities can collaborate with the private sector to scale carbon credit financing.
Thank you. I think I have some exciting news today. We've heard so many challenges and things from our government, municipal, sort of provincial colleagues. Something that I can assure you of is that public and private sector seems to have very similar challenges. We also submit budgets, and then somewhere down the line something pops out and you know what you're working with in some way in a budget cycle. So I think none of us are getting away, well, no one has a get out of jail free card here. We're all dealing with the same challenge, and I think our chair earlier also mentioned that even in Rome, where he's sitting with his 20 beautiful trees, similar challenge, right? I can't agree more with the funding challenge. Even in private sector, we deal, as Future World International, we only deal with the private sector. We also only deal with private sector entities who has an interest in the green economy. We like to look at the world for 50 years backwards, so we don't really optimize anything into the future. We don't think that's a sustainable solution or approach to take. So if we take a look at 40, 50 years from now, if you're not investing in the green economy at this point in time, you're not going to be part of the economy 50 years down the line. So we feel very strongly about that. And with that, we deal with numerous private sector corporates that as very strongly believes in the green economy and spend actually a lot of money on the green economy. I think maybe somewhere where there's a misalignment that we certainly need to address is how do we get then the private sector with their spending, and I'm not even talking about financial institutions, which is so important in this, but how do we get the private sector with their projects that they are running very internally focused, right? So we deal a lot with mines, we deal a lot with food and beverage companies. They all spend enormously. SAPI is, I think, a prime example of people really spending and focusing on solving environmental, nature, those sort of challenges. So there needs to be a gap closed. One of the solutions that we see playing out, obviously, is carbon credits. We need to get carbon credits under the belt because water credits are coming, right? Reusing water, those sort of things. So we need to focus on this carbon credit thing and get that up and running for all of us in this room that feel so strongly about the green economy. It needs to leverage, it needs to solve some of all these critical issues that we've spoken about today. Carbon credits is not a quick solve, like anything else worthwhile. It's going to take time. I think Andre alluded to planting trees takes time. One of the solutions someone in one of our brainstorms came up with is from an urban forestation perspective, you plant 1 million trees, convert it into carbon credits. I'm actually an agriculturist. That is my sort of legacy work that I'm trying to establish. I've planted 100,000 trees. 1 million trees is a lot of trees to plant. There's a lot of things around that. We need to protect our soil. So as soon as we talk carbon credits, as soon as we talk urban forestry, we need to talk about soil. There's a lot of work, regenerative work that needs to go in there. We need to talk about water, a lot of work that needs to go in there. If you look at the work that's been done on public spending toward water reuse, water saving, wastewater, critical thing to shift. And I think financial services critical, very important there. We are super excited as Future World. We are establishing an office from 013. It's a London-based firm. We're working with them, establishing a Joburg office to try and set up a digital technology hub where we want to start facilitating this discussion between public sector, private sector, financial institutions, industry bodies, which no one has spoken to today about, super important. We definitely see SAPI as a leader from a forestry industry in South Africa. We need to start creating a platform with the projects that these entities are running. What are the funds that's important? How do we create larger projects from simple projects that are registered on this? And then how do we enable global funding into our carbon credits to get that up and running? So well said. I mean, you need the funding to get the revenue streams running, right? And no one wants to invest privately in something that's not revenue generating immediately. So we are establishing a project, an office, and I think that was the reason why we got an invite today with the 013 hat on today, is that we want to establish a technological base, a digital base, where we start registering all these projects that we are busy with, registering the numerous projects that private sector is busy with, to see how we can collaborate on funding, on financing, on projects, to get bigger bang for our buck that all of us are struggling with, certainly the biggest challenge today. Carbon credits itself, massive skills thinking that's going in there, definitely something that's not going away. The JSE is starting to create a platform for us from a stock exchange perspective, which is going to be super welcome and super supportive in this initiative that we do need to get up and running. But I think our time's up. Open for any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I can spend another 2 hours on carbon credits, but let's leave that for another day.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are really limited when it comes to time. I've been instructed to stop at 1:15. So we actually have about 7 minutes, really. But I want to see if we can get some questions from the floor. But I would want to put the MD on the spot. I see you have already raised your hand, because you are sitting here listening to all these challenges and opportunities. Maybe just take a moment. Let me see if... Yeah. Okay. Let me just...
No, thank you, Program Director. And listening to the discussions, I'm normally a very positive person who doesn't get very optimistic or pessimistic. But this discussion has confirmed certain things that practitioners in the green environment and in local government are experiencing. Not only did my colleague from SALGA confirm the challenges around prioritization of the budget, the lack of consistent funding, the fact that local government looks from one term to the next term. So greening is a long-term program, it's a long-term project. There's no political mayor actually focuses on greening, because within that 5-year term, the impact of that greening is not going to assist that mayor to get elected when the polls come. So they all usually look at dealing with potholes and doing that, etc., what is there. And therefore funding follows what the political priorities are and what the demands of that society are. And therefore that's the challenge we're experiencing internally. And then you listen to the development funders. Also the same thing. There must be clear income. I invest, therefore there must be a funding so that I can see how funding, whether it's grant or loan, is going to be funded. Something that JCPZ might not be able to do, except to put the zoo out there and say, you will collect revenue from the zoo for the next 10 years, therefore give us money. You know what I'm trying to say? So you've got AFD, you've got the Development Bank of South Africa, all of them just saying, yes, we hear about you, but we do not have means and ways and instruments to assist you. But I, by the way, would love to assist you if you can do 1, 2, and 3 and ensure that the city of Johannesburg guarantees us 1, 2, and 3, and National Treasury agrees to that. And I'm saying, okay. Then I say, oh, maybe the private sector, trees, big guys. Says, we like you. We like urban greening. We like that thing. We like urban forestry. But if the city of Johannesburg is not giving us reliable water, reliable power, roads, housing for, those kind of things, and you find yourself as a practitioner that says, all directions, there's no one out there except all of us. Yeah. All of us express the same sentiments. We love greening. We know what's going to happen if we do not take care of the environment. We know climate, nice things, climate proofing, dealing with flooding, because if we don't do anything, all of us are going to find ourselves in trouble. But no one, except those practitioners who are already in the field, wants to actually lead the way. And we'd like to thank the Wits University in terms of the work that they've done to actually scan the environment within a very short space of time to identify funding. and the picture is bleak in the sense that there is no funding that is clear for green and urban programs, but one day we'll get there.
Thank you so much, MT. You will understand my predicament. I couldn't stop him. He is the host. But when it comes to you, I'm going to stop you, definitely. So there was somebody who had a mic. So let's go. 1 minute, please. Just a question. Don't explain anything. Just a question so that we close. So let me see the hands. So from there, we'll come here, and then we'll go there. And then there's one at the end there. Okay.
Thank you so much. My question is directed towards Safli. You said for the private sector to come in, you need to have done something. So my question is, everyone can do something because we have something that we have, but sometimes we don't know the value of what we have. So is there anything that you would help with, not in terms of money, but in terms of expertise, to help identify what local government has, or even individuals, that they can use to then get to a stage where you can then come in with the money?
Yeah. Can we have the mic here? Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also worried about the local governments. I asked 2 days ago, so the local government or the federal government have to get a designated budget so that they can be able to facilitate a lot of activities on forestry. Then number 2, the corporate social responsibility. Somebody have said that. Then the question to us is that the private sector, what do you have for them? If they can able to key into it, you can even give them tax relief system to be able to speed up their businesses. And that one will encourage them to support any initiative you are doing. Then finally, we also need to look at how can we plan to engage the politicians. Just like you have said, because their interest may not be in the area of forestry, but if you engage them in a mutual benefit, and that will be a quick win for them to understand for investment in the area of forestry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we have the mic there? And then we'll take one last question there. Okay. Let me see.
Yes, thank you very much. Daniel Paddy is my name. So my question goes to the carbon financing. When it comes to cities and municipalities, and we look at the negotiations of carbon credits and international protocols, and also the mechanisms that comes in verification of carbon credits within. How can cities and municipalities find themselves meeting those conditions, especially ensuring that the trees planted do have to stay in that place for a given period of time before the credit is actually paid? How can cities and municipalities find themselves doing that? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have the question there brief, please, and then we will end here. So I'm not taking any more questions because we are out of time.
Thank you. Waitumelo from Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo. Mine is more of insurance. You've listed a couple of channels where we can access finance, but then now looking at the issue of urbanization, it comes with so many anthropogenic activities that are causing the ecosystem to diminish. So in our case, we'll find that we've got cases of falling trees and all those kind of things, and particularly looking at our informal settlement whereby the resident, they cannot even afford insurance. Is there any some means of insurance with regard to such incidents? Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally here. Is it working? Oh. Can you please turn on this mic if possible? No? Try speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Nati from JCPZ. My question is specifically to DBSA. How do you advertise yourself? How do we get to know the things that you offer, or the funding that you have to offer to entities, to departments? And then the second one is, if there is any red tape, how do you cut through the red tape so as to expedite some of this funding? Thank you. Okay.
I'm not sure that we have time for them to respond. I just need to be guided by the organizer so that I don't... Should we close it now?
I would suggest maybe a 1 minute each final statement, trying to answer some of the questions if you can.
I don't know.
Need to close. Sorry.
Please, a minute each. Those that have to respond. You don't have to respond to anything because people can still approach you during the break time.
Well, for me, the 1 minute would be that one gap that is very clear is that there is mobilization of funding that is coming from the top, international, national. There is uptake gap at the bottom. Currently, we are fixing it through capacity building, and I think that's where we need to correct. We need to fix it through a partnership of developing projects and fetching projects in order to link it with the funding. That's the work that needs to go from here on to not just capacity building, create a sustainable mechanism of identifying and developing projects and get those projects to be funded and see them through the implementation. And that's the point I'm just making, that capacity building, just teach people to do this, is not going to generate projects. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Olympus?
Thank you very much. I had to respond. There was a direct question for DBSA. There are various ways one could get hold of the offerings from the DBSA. But I think what I found to be quite important is direct engagements with municipalities in the form of workshops that we carry out. In those workshops, what we do is we have got key personnel from different municipalities and key personnel from the DBSA side. We present the offering, the total offering of the bank, and try to align it to the needs of the municipalities. And in that way, we can create a long-term relationship that try to address specific issues. But with that, we have also found that it is important in informing various innovative financing instruments that we put in place to support municipalities. I know we don't have time, but some of you might be aware that we've recently put together on a national basis a water reuse program to support municipalities, and it's to respond to key needs within municipalities. You'd also know that we have put together an embedded generation program that supports municipalities. It's in response to the needs of municipalities. We are finalizing a program around waste management with support from the GCF, is to respond to the needs of the municipalities. So it's understanding those key strategic issues within municipalities, building solutions to respond to that, and then with that, continually helping municipalities to be able to take advantage of the offerings that we put in place.
Thank you so much. 1 minute, Nokuthula.
Yeah, I just want to say, MD, it's not all doom and gloom. So, and would actually like to invite the City of Johannesburg and other municipalities to partner with us, because as you can see, there's a gap between what the development banks are saying and what the municipalities are able to provide. And we can help to create that credible pipeline and look at innovative finance mechanisms to be able to bridge this financing gap. For example, the ones that I've mentioned with the financial institutions, with insurance companies who have a lot to lose if our ecological infrastructure is not maintained. So this is just to say, those who would like to partner and to try and see how we can implement some innovative finance mechanisms, we are available and would like to talk. Thanks.
Thank you. Andre?
Maybe what I'm picking up is urban greening should be apolitical. It should be an apolitical topic, which is a long-term commitment from the city and all the parties in the city. And there are lots of other political balls that can be kicked around. If we can get urban forestry as an apolitical long-term commitment, that would, I think, unlock some of those problems. To the other question, it's about having that conversation. So, where we are and where the municipalities, the communities where we are, is to begin to have the conversation, begin to ask the questions, and then to tease out what are the actual issues in the community, what are the skills and the assets that the community actually has, what is the spending power of the community. You'd be surprised how many communities have no idea how much spending power they actually have that they can spend in their own community, but they drive to the next community and spend it there in a shop instead of in their own community. So there's that, but it's having that conversation, and we're very happy to have that because that teases out the real issues and then the real options, because sometimes it's connecting you to the right person to have the right conversation. So we as SAPI haven't spent any money, but we've understood how to connect you to the right person to have the right conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Ronel, do you want to say something or you're fine? 1 minute?
Yeah, just final thing. For municipalities, carbon credits aren't something that you just plant trees. It's a little bit bigger than that. We need to guarantee sort of the sequestration that we are committing to. And that is why it takes a bit longer. I think the positive news is that we are trying to get those timelines down from 12 to 18-month project registrations to 3 months through digitization, which I think is going to make a massive difference. Plugging in funding and financing, like everybody discussed.
Okay.
Thanks.
Finally, Ian.
I would like to throw a message to the cities. So we need them to invest more and to invest better. And they can do that through, first of all, fiscal reforms. And we have had several projects that are giving very good reforms in West Africa now. Also through leveraging public funds with concessional finance, because that will attract private sector. And finally, tackle the climate finance flows. It seems like we have been given a negative perspective, but there are a lot of possibilities going from carbon markets, green bonds, there's the GEF funds, a lot of funds available. And by investing better, I mean, we should stop focusing on mega projects and thinking more of smaller, cheaper, locally rooted projects that will boost urban productivity and, as you mentioned yesterday in one of your presentations, that involve the informal sector.
Okay. Thank you so much. There was an observation that we didn't have anyone here from philanthropy. Would have loved to hear from foundations, but I spend my time, playing around with fundraising. So what I heard here is that, there's this section where we say fundraising at times requires you to know what the right time is, what is the right amount that you are looking for, what is the right donor that you are talking to, who is the right person to make the ask, what is the right reason for asking, and what is the right place for asking. If those 6 issues are dealt with, you can deal with all these sources that are up here. So I just wanted to make that as my final input. So thank you so much. Can I ask us to thank our panel? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm handing over to the MC.
Thank you very much, Professor Moyo. I think one more round of applause for the fantastic panel here. And so please stay with us for a minute. We'll take a group photo now once the break starts. So once again, let me thank the CAPSI Center of the WITS University, because they really helped us a lot in putting together this session, and also thank you for the introduction. And let me once again thank you, Salga, who has been really playing a key role in helping us put these days together. So it's been a very important contribution. I've also been asked to thank the Urban Municipal Development Fund, because they're going to support us in putting together a knowledge product out of this, I think, with the support of ADB. So thank you. I have a very practical announcement. There's Pamela Ochungu and Germaine Muvungi. If you're in the room, please try and meet with your facilitator for your session. So thanks again. Now we go into the parallel sessions. You've been, after the coffee break, sorry. So a very short coffee break, please, maybe 15 minutes, and then you can move on to the parallel sessions. I'm not sure if we have the list of the parallel sessions here. Yes, you know how it works. So find your favorite session, enjoy, and we'll come back even happier after lunch for some more parallel sessions and then the end of the day. So thank you all again. Enjoy your coffee break, and we'll see you later. Do you want a portable mic? You want a portable mic? No, that's what we ask. Can we get a... sorry. Can you get a floor mic for Elijah like that? Floor mic? Yep, thanks. You're going to be walking around. Now we can have the mic. Thank you. Welcome, survivors. Those who survived 3 days of conference. This is the strongest group, where real stamina is. And all the sides all seem to be on this side. I don't know. I have nobody on that side. I don't know if this is the lucky side or something. Oh, I'm not sure. Anyways, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the parallel sessions and the side events this afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch. I hope you had good tea. And now we're ready for our final sessions. Now, we do have a slight change in the program. We had originally planned to have some discussion groups or working groups, but that proved to be too cumbersome in the setting, and there's not many people left anyway, so we thought we would basically develop a declaration on the basis of all that we heard in the last 3 days, and read it out and then approve it by acclamation, unless you have something really strong about it, and then we'll listen to you to object if you're ready. You can say, no, I hate this. So, without further ado, we're going to have 2 more keynote presentations this afternoon. So we're going to hear from Kwan Solomon, who's a finance analyst for the Green Cape, and from Elijah Ramulifo, who is the Program Manager of Sustainable and Resilient Cities of the South African Cities Network. So I would maybe invite Kwan to start first. Please, Kwan, floor is yours. You have about, let's say, 12, 15 minutes max, and I'll be hovering around here when it's time to close.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have the privilege of stepping in for Ms. Kobisa Magazi, who's a bit ill today, so she wasn't able to present her keynotes. But I'm honored to be here and to speak to you, especially since you are the survivors. It is really, I think, going to be a challenge to speak to scientists and academics on finance, but I'm hoping I do grasp your interest with my presentation. I also don't have a presentation, and I'm very nervous at public speaking, so all eyes will be on me. So I'll ask for your forgiveness. So, maybe just a quick intro to myself. My name is Kwan Solomon. I am a green finance analyst at an organization called Green Cape. So essentially, I have a background in development finance, and I've done some work with the Presidential Climate Commission on tracking climate finance flows within the country. So essentially engaging with financiers, ecosystem players, and state organizations like the National Treasury to get their insights on climate finance. Additionally, I have been privileged to support Ayanda and the team in terms of the report they were writing on the urban forests, mobilizing finance for urban forest and green spaces in cities. So essentially, to set context to this presentation or speech as it is, South Africa has the opportunity to host the G20 year, and it is a historical opportunity as it's the first time that this summit's been hosted on the continent. So essentially, this is an equal important opportunity to mobilize climate finance and kind of push it at the agenda for the transition to a low-carbon economy and to promote resilience in the economy. So Africa has the opportunity to basically lead climate finance investments. And speaking of Africa, I want to kind of unpack the climate finance landscape of Africa. So a report done in 2024 by one of our project partners, the Climate Policy Initiative, looking at the flows of climate finance in the continent, essentially found that climate finance increased from around $29.5 billion in the years 2019 and 2020 to around $43 billion in the years 2021 and 2022. So essentially it's important figures, but it's still found that this needs to quadruple, so increase by 4 times each year, year on year, to actually meet collectively the continent's nationally determined contributions. So it's an important climate financing need. And while Africa holds enormous potential in terms of solar and wind potential, having vast carbon sinks, and where I guess that's the interest for all of the urban forests and urban greening, as well as having critical natural resources like cobalt and copper, which are essential for global supply chains, we also have the opportunity to catalyze these for investment opportunities. So it's not just an environmental conversation, but also an economic one. And without urgent access for climate finance or mobilizing climate finance, the cost of actually inaction is greater than the current cost of climate finance. So by 2050, we would lose 20% of our GDP per year if we don't act now, which is really interesting. And this actually takes away from the other factors that when you consider the cost. So beyond just the economic cost, looking at the socio-economic cost and the development cost, there's going to be much more food insecurity and hunger, much more increased heat-related mortalities, as well as the loss of biodiversity and natural ecosystems. So then unpacking the African landscape as well, looking at the finance, 82% of climate finance actually comes in the continent actually comes from public sources, and these being multilateral development finance institutions, and private sector investments actually increasing, and this is due to initiatives like specifically in carbon markets, like the African Carbon Markets Initiative that's been established. But then you still see this concentration of climate finance. So just 10 nations hold 50% of the track climate finance, which is very strange. And then 30 nations actually share just 10% of track climate finance. So you really see that concentration going to specific regions. Beyond that, and even a more scarier fact, is the fact that the 10 most climate vulnerable nations only receive 10%. So they're significantly underfunded in terms of their climate investments. Looking at utilizing domestic capital. So our financial markets, our commercial banks, our pension and insurance assets sits at about $2.7 trillion. But these majority of the sources are coming from international sources. And this shows that domestic capital on the continent is not being utilized as well. And then just shifting away from the African perspective and honing in more on what's happening in our country, South Africa, and a report that I got the privilege to work with as well. So my organization, Green Cape, was commissioned by the Presidential Climate Commission to track the climate finance flows, and we did this alongside the Climate Policy Initiative. What we found was that the track climate finance for the years 2019 to 2021 annually resulted at 131 billion rand, and that's pretty much a very exciting number. It's a big number, but this still needs to increase by 3 to 5 times to actually meet our NDCs and net zero goals respectively. So there's still a need to fund these investments. And then contrary to the study that was presented this morning, and my assumptions are due to different methodologies, timeframes, possibly stakeholders engaged, and aims of the reports, we found that 86% of the track climate finance flows actually came from the private sector. This is through those engagements and surveys with the private sector that we've conducted. So 86% came from the private sector, majority of it going into clean energy, and which is probably evidence of the market's response to our energy challenges within the country. And then again, we have 14% that came from public sources, so from international DFIs, as well as the state government, so the South African government that's actually funded the public portion of climate finance. And majority of that, again, clean energy, as well as agriculture, forestries, and other land uses. And then another interesting fact is that opposed to the African context, South Africa's climate finance is actually raised 91% domestically, which is pretty interesting. So we're able to catalyze local investments. So now I've painted a picture of climate finance. We've seen it from an African perspective as well as a South African perspective. Let's unpack kind of what resources and potential resources there are for especially you guys in the room to kind of access and be aware of. So the first enabler of this climate finance is our financial markets or climate finance ecosystem, which is ever growing, and it has a number of sources and initiatives. So these being multilateral climate funds as well as national climate funds. So we have the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So I know DBSA did present earlier, and it does sound very much like a restricted to South Africa, but it's Southern Africa. So I think their mandate covers sub-Saharan African reach. So they have a green fund as well as a climate finance facility. And then the World Bank, the IUCN, and the EEPA also provide additional funding support. And then I'd just like to unpack some of the solutions that have been provided by state institutions like our National Treasury. So the National Treasury actually is looking at engaging in disaster risk financing. So they're implementing a disaster risk financing strategy, essentially looking at creating innovative financing strategies and risk transfer to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And then this strategy is looking at basically boosting capacity or the state's capacity to fund disaster recovery efforts and expand insurance mechanisms to protect against the financial strain of natural disasters. And additional to that, they're looking at different reforms, especially in terms of responding to growing climate risk. These reforms against the conditional grant system. So I think municipalities would be able to catalyze those grants to respond with the upcoming reforms. Looking at reforming the government's borrowing structure for infrastructure as well to enable longer term infrastructure projects. And details of these were tabled in the 2025 budget speech that the finance minister addressed recently. And then from the states as well, we have a climate change response fund as well, the CCRF. So this was established by our president in 2024 to mitigate climate disasters as well as support adaptation efforts. This is housed by the PCC, so the Presidential Climate Commission, as well as the Department for Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. And at the current state, the government's looking at actually aligning these mechanisms against each other. So looking at how to incorporate elements of the disaster risk framework against the current CCRF or the Climate Change Response Fund, as well as also looking at what's necessary to implement the recently implemented Climate Change Acts as well. Beyond this, I know a lot of the municipalities and cities said today that tagging and attracting finance is kind of an issue as well. So there's been efforts around a green finance taxonomy locally as well that's been established by National Treasury and a number of working groups, as well as a climate budget tagging framework that's been tested and implemented by the National Treasury. So these seek to align investment needs with, or local investment needs with international and national climate goals. And going forward, we're looking at basically utilizing these frameworks to unlock investment opportunities, enhance financial oversight, as well as build investor confidence. With regards to the climate budget tagging, once these are institutionalized, it will guide budgetary choices that better reflect climate objectives. Going forward, both of these would look at implementing elements of a just transition. So this looks beyond what's required from a green lens or environmental lens and consider more broader social objectives, cultural objectives, political objectives. The climate budget tagging framework as well is also going to implement some of these objectives. The National Treasury is actually engaging with the JET project management unit, so the JET PMU, which was established by the presidency to form more alignment with these JET frameworks and requirements. So all of the above will share bearing for national and local government reporting on climate finance and investments. And just speaking to the just energy transition and those sort of levers that are available, there is a municipal JET support program as well, which looks at driving local level climate action plans, leveraging different stakeholders to support municipal climate resilience. There's a JET financing mechanism as well, looking at mobilizing finance, project preparation, local capacity building. There's been an establishment of the JET project management units, as well as the JET funding platform, which seeks to make climate projects against different grant funders as well. And then zooming out again from the local context into an African perspective, there's been some work done by the African Financial Alliance on Climate Change as well, looking at developing an ESG taxonomy, basically to create a standardized framework for sustainable investments on the economy. I know as well the AFDB is doing some work on enabling regional taxonomies as well, so that may come live soon. And then just to give a small conclusion, as we do prepare to host the G20, we should take this opportunity to actually elevate Africa's climate agenda. So the continent has unparalleled potential, and not just in renewable energy and natural resources, but also in our young, dynamic population that will drive the sustainable growth. However, without greater investments, better financing mechanisms, and more equitable climate finance flows, we risk bearing the highest cost of the climate crisis. So the G20 will provide a critical platform for us to scale up climate finance across the continent, mobilize domestic capital, ensuring finance reaches the most vulnerable communities, as well as strengthening policy frameworks to attract long-term sustainable investments. And to close, finally, I will say that climate finance is not just about the numbers. I know I presented a lot of numbers today, but it's more than that. It's about the people, it's about the communities, and it's about the future of our continents. So with bold leadership, strategic investments, and unwavering commitment, we can turn Africa's climate challenges into unprecedented opportunities for sustainable growth and resilience. Thank you.
Good test for your public speaking. So you did pretty well. Practice a little more, but you're almost there. Okay, now we're going to welcome Elijah to join us on the floor. Elijah Ramofilifo, I said earlier, is the program manager for the Sustainable and Resilient Cities for the South African Cities Network. So, Elijah, the floor is yours.
Oh, can I get that roaming mic? Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone. It's also my pleasure to be presenting. Okay, let's close that one. It's also my pleasure to be presenting, this afternoon to you. We were given a very difficult task, when Ayanda contacted us to say, your task is to repeat what has been said, but by not repeating it. So we have to create a synthesis of what has been said, but saying it differently. So I have prepared a slideshow, and I know in the interest of time is not on our side. So I'll try and run, quickly to it. If we can loop it. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. It's not showing on my side. So it means I have to look back. So just quickly, just setting up the scene. Recently, the World Economic Forum have published a report in terms of the global risk index. And, just to set the scene, we are seeing that, issues that are surrounding extreme weather events, are actually at the high level in terms of the risk at a global scale. And we are saying that, as environmentalists, our current market, which is led, by approaches towards, economic development, is not bearing any fruit in terms of ensuring that we preserve and conserve our natural resources. So if you can see there, you can see that, extreme weather, over the 2 years projection, currently is sitting at, number 2. But if you look at, an extension in terms of, the projection, 10 years down the line, you can see all the green variables or parameters which looks at, the status of the environment which we care and cater for. So it is important that we have to act now, because the cost of inaction will lead to apocalyptic, output. So what we are saying now is to say, if you look at what is leading now in the current stage is misinformation. With the emergence of social media and all that, you can see that extreme weather events then is a serious problem. Because with social media and all the communication, you minus that, then you have extreme weather events leading in terms of the risk. So just moving ahead, we are saying that, in ensuring that we ensure that our economic development is grounded and premised in terms of environmental sustainability, we need to look at this, what we call the SDG wedding cake. And you see, in terms of what is on the ground or what is premised. You see you have SDG 6, 14, 15, and 13. These are core in terms of your climate action, life underwater, life on land, and ensuring that we have clean water and air. So it means that in terms of the base, we need to ensure that we take care of this. The rest can come, while we are ensuring that, we are preserving and conserving our natural resources. And just to mention on that, we are saying that in terms of economic and financial sustainability, the corporate and the financial sectors, they can't have the cake and eat it. We need to start ensuring that the investment is towards the environment, because it's the environment that sustains their businesses. Okay, so how do you do that? You ensure that you find solvency with the environment. How do we find solvency with the environment? Solvency speaks to issues of balancing your debt and asset base. So if you are looking at your environment or natural resources as your asset base, it means that you have to ensure that you take care of those. Otherwise, you are running a risk of being insolvent with the natural resources, because we are not having infinite natural resources. So I'll just browse quickly in terms of the time lapse, in terms of where we are, but we are approaching a tipping point where if we don't act, we are going to get into this region of uncertainty, shocks, and disruption. And we can see in other regions that, the signs are there already. So how do we ensure that, we find resilience, with the environment, or build solvency with the environment? As I've already indicated, we have to prime all our investments with the earth system. Beyond that, there's nothing that we are going to sustain, as humankind. So we need to ensure that, from the premise, from business sector, all different sector, industries and all that, we have to ensure that, we premise our financial models on the basis of earth as our base. And currently, as indicated in my opening slide, that the current financial and economic model are not finding their basis on the environment. Okay, and then we can look at all this. But in terms of this flower here, it's almost, if you're looking at it from the top down, you can see that the biosphere is still the base, and then followed by society and the economy at the tertiary level. So in terms of green finance mapping, my co-presenter has spoken very well about that, and we've seen, had this throughout the session. I think Dr. or Prof. Moyo spoke about this in one of the parallel sessions. It was also addressed in the opening presentation this morning. But all it says is that there are some green shoots, okay? Make no mistake about that, there are some green shoots in terms of investment towards environmental, sustainability and green financing, okay? However, in terms of areas where these investments are taken towards to or focused to, it's mostly on areas of mitigation. Okay. However, we need to ensure that we find balance. To ensure that issues of adaptation and resilience also get the piece of the pie, or the piece of the very cake that we spoke about earlier on. So in terms of all this, who's benefiting from all these, billions that we are seeing coming into the green finance market? Is Africa sitting in the table, or we are eating from below the table? This will show us. So in terms of where this 281 billion that has been invested into the green financing and green finance market, you see that only 5% of that is coming to, actually 1.5 billion, which is 5% of that money is invested in sub-Saharan Africa, which is something to ponder. To say, as African, are we going to be the ones who are always going out to knock on these doors? Are we sustainable by ourselves? Can we find innovative measures and models that we can be able to sustain ourselves as a continent? So that's a question to ponder. Otherwise, all the other, fund is going into the Asia Pacific and all other regions. So here is what we have to say are the takeaways in terms of what has been presented throughout the sessions, starting from Tuesday. And of course, there are many others. We are saying that this lack of conducive policy environment for capital private investment. As government, as municipalities, as cities, we need to ensure that our policy frameworks, plans, and action speak to the investors. It drives interest from the investors to ensure that they invest in our projects. Okay, funding remains a barrier. We've spoken to that throughout the sessions. However, that also provides an opportunity for us to plan for innovative solutions. We have data-driven, decision, tools that can assist us in terms of ensuring that our financial models, speak to what, will ensure that, the investor come into the table and be willing to sit with us. Unfavorable credit profile to access funding, the cost of financing. Investors will look at that, to say, are you bankable as a municipality, as a city, as a country? Or as a community-based organization, what is our return of investment in us, bringing our investment into your project? So we need to look into that. Need for capacity building, project preparation. This was spoken about, comprehensively in the morning session. So I won't, elaborate on that in the interest of time. Urban greening offers environmental, social welfare, health, and economic benefits. That also came out through the whole entire sessions. Project alignment with private sector, long-term strategic vision and prioritization of greening agenda. That also came out in the morning, throughout from industry actually, to say maybe something to look into is to depoliticize our projects, so that at least our alignment in terms of that will not be in line with the political cycles, wherein a mayor will come in and then the mayor knows that in the next 5 years I'm not going to be in. So why should I invest in a project that the fruits are only going to benefit somebody else? So we need to ensure that maybe there is an alignment or is an area to look into as cities to depoliticize, our projects. I'm not going to touch on this. This has been coming out throughout in terms of what are the benefits that we can derive from urban greening. So identified challenge. I'm saying here, in old age, the legs die first. So if you don't take care of your roots, of course, there won't be any greening that shoots out. So you need to ensure that you deal with the problems that we are facing as cities. Number one, insufficient collaboration. We are sitting here, we are operating in different spaces, environment, and sectors. But is there a platform where we sit and collaborate and find a common ground wherein all of us can benefit? We need to look into that. And that hinders effective policy development because everyone is operating in silos. Okay? Inadequate investment that has been spoken about throughout the session. It reduces implementation of green initiatives. And investment here speaks to across sectors, from capacity building, education, science, technology, and innovation. There isn't enough investment in terms of that. Fragmented knowledge sharing, we need science. We need science. We need to ensure that we build platforms where we can have peer-to-peer learning platform, where we share knowledge with each other. Okay, so these are challenges that have been identified throughout the sessions. Absence of clear metrics in terms of project development, project planning. You need to see, where are you going? What are your timelines for your project? In terms of measurability, what is it that you're going to be measuring your project against? So you need to design, clear metrics that will be able to ensure that there's accountability in terms of those projects that you'll be developing. Lack of community engagement, we fail to address local needs. And there's an opportunity missed there in terms of ensuring that we scale up these projects that are happening, because there are projects that are happening, but they are happening at a small scale, at a community-based level. So if we ensure that we engage with all this community and bring them all together, there is an opportunity that we can be able to scale up this community-based project. Poor management of impact, as I said, it links to the previous point that I've just said, to say we need to ensure that we communicate the small successes, because there are projects that are happening at a small scale, but we need to ensure that we speak more about the successes. What opportunity exists for African cities? This as well has been spoken about in terms of innovative financing models. The mechanisms that are available in terms of that, I'm not going to touch into that. Leapfrogging to green solutions. We have what is called a latecomers advantage. To say, yes, we are underdeveloped, but that says there's an opportunity exactly there to ensure that as we develop, we bypass fossilized systems and ensure that we look into green-related, green infrastructure, green policies, that speaks to what we are trying to achieve, okay? And then, of course, dynamic and youthful society, we need to tap into that. Community-led resilience, the communities will tell you nothing for us without us. So you need to ensure that you engage and collaborate and cooperate, with the community for the projects to be able to be a success. Regional collaboration, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. It's an African proverb that we all know. There's sustainability in that statement. It speaks to resource efficiency. It speaks to resource management. It speaks to leadership. So we need to ensure that we collaborate at a regional level. So this, I think, should be my last slide. So charting the way forward. Having said what we have said, and understood where the challenges are and where the problems are. So what is it that we can do? And there are many other themes that can come out. But this was my synthesis as I was listening to all the sessions that I was able to attend. Number one, this lack of capacity. We need to build capacity. So this speaks to issues of training and tools to develop bankable projects, especially in small or smaller municipalities. Okay. Number two, we need to strengthen governance as cities. There need to be reform planning systems to integrate climate goals within our urban development agendas. The issues of intention versus actions. We speak about this thing, there's intention, but in terms of practicality, we don't see them happening at that level. Leverage partnership, foster public-private collaborations and regional alliances to unlock funding and expertise. It speaks to the African proverb that I have, alluded to. And then lastly, prioritize data and innovation. This speaks to science. Use data-driven insight and pilot new financing mechanism to bridge the investment gap. There's a lot of tools that are available, readily available. Yesterday, there was a presentation from, I can't remember their name, but they were presenting, a free for all, open source use, wherein you can use that tool to generate any form of GIS, that you need. And this will be able to assist you in terms of decision making and building your project towards bankability. And in conclusion, I'm saying, and paraphrasing, Walt Kelly here, we found the problem, and the problem is us. So humankind, since creation, have been the problem. the Creator created the trees, the garden, and everything, but the moment the human was put into that garden, that's where the problem started. But the call here is to say, and yesterday there was a question, about identity, and I identify as youth as well. I'm saying to the youth generation, let us be the generation that brings about solution and not add into the problems. Because our past generation are actually who this statement is talking to. Thank you so much.
The mic here? Yes, thank you, Elijah. That was a fantastic summary. Now, from your proverbs, I say, my legs are not so good anymore. In old age, my legs die first, right? So that's the legs started to give way. Maybe it's the 3 days of conference that's done that. Okay, so before we give the floor to Thenjiwe and Daniel to start reading the declaration, I just wanted to inform you that the book of abstracts has been finalized, so it's available on the website. And so all those who have submitted papers or posters have been included in that. It's available, so if you want to consult and reach out to, or particularly for those presentations you've missed, you can at least get a summary of what has happened. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have, let's say, a little arbitrarily, let's say, within a smaller group of the scientific committee and the organizing committee, put together a final declaration. We hope it captures all that we've heard in the last few days. We try to put together something that makes sense. Once again, it's not a binding document or anything, it's really a declaration of what we feel should be the next steps in this work. So I would like to invite Thenjiwe Mioli from the City of Johannesburg and Daniel Paddy from the City of Kampala to help us read through the declaration. I'm not sure who's going to go first. Daniel, I think. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much, all participants, for the Second African Forum on Urban Forests. Yes, I like the conclusion of the previous speaker. We found the problem, and the problem is us. What a nice way to conclude. However, we found the solution. And we, the participants of the Second African Forum on Urban Forests, gathered here in Johannesburg, from the 18th to the 21st March 2025, under the theme, Greening Horizons, Shaping the Future, Resilience of African Cities Through Urban Forests, reaffirm the critical role of urban forests and green spaces in strengthening African cities through global climate change challenges and in creating healthier, more inclusive, equitable, and resilient communities. Our commitment, being on the momentum of the 2018 call for action for the First World Forum on Urban Forests, the Washington Declaration 2023, and the Second World Forum on Urban Forests, the United Nations Agenda 2020, particularly Sustainable Development Goals 11, 13, 15, and Agenda 2063 Africa, and the Agenda 2063 Africa We Want of the African Union Aspirations 1 and 3, recognize the urgent need to expand urban forestry and create resilient cities and communities. Additionally, we align the global biodiversity. We align with the global biodiversity framework, Target 12, and the Paris Agreement, which calls for expanding access to green and blue spaces in urban and peri-urban areas. Why urban forests matter? Despite the unprecedented scale of urbanization, growth of informal settlements, climate change effects, and land degradation and deforestation in Africa, we are certain that carefully designed, implemented, and maintained green spaces such as urban forests, can strengthen social cohesion, heritage, and sense of belonging, promote spatial equity to improve public health and well-being, create employment, entrepreneurship, and local development for all, generate ecosystem goods and services, provide quality space for tourism and recreation, support biodiversity, build capacity to adapt to climate change while mitigating extreme heat, flooding, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and serve as places for environmental education and traditional learning. Despite the growing recognition of these benefits, distribution, quality, and access to urban greening and urban forests, remain unequal. We must bridge the gap. Our call to action. We urge decision makers, urban planners, foresters, ecologists, botanists, architects, and landscape architects, engineers, the health sector, including traditional healers, civil society, and all the community members, as well as development financiers and partners and the private sector, to work together to ensure that green spaces, including urban forests, are inclusive, designed for diverse physical, social, and cultural needs, safe, well-maintained, and equipped with necessary facilities, and developed with local residents in the planning and maintaining to ensure they meet the community needs. Well managed, aiming for optimal outcomes and overcoming legislative, political, financial, institutional, land use planning, cultural, social, and physiological barriers, minimizing trade-offs and ecosystem services. Equitably distributed. All communities, regardless of income, race, gender, or locality, have access to quality green spaces, enhancing environmental justice. Multifunctional, resilient, and sustainable. Supporting recreation, livelihoods, education, and biodiversity, and habitat connectivity.
Therefore, our specific recommendations are, particularly, we recommend collaborative implementation of urban greening and forests across multiple sectors that mobilize diverse funding, such as municipal budgets, carbon markets, public-private sector partnerships and insurance, and positions urban forests as economic assets linked to local employment and ecotourism. Addresses governance by taking decisive steps to develop inclusive policies, leverage indigenous systems, enforce regulations, land tenure, and build long-term political commitment that reimagines urbanization. Focuses on environmental and climate challenges, selecting diverse native species, restoring water catchments and healthy reservoirs, investing in waste management, and addressing historic inequalities and environmental injustices, urban agriculture, and climate-proof green infrastructure. Prioritizes research and monitoring by strengthening, standardizing metrics, establishing tree inventories, coordinating feedback, facilitating data sharing, and increasing funding for research and development. Engages communities through centering local voices in planning and management, improving participatory decision-making, working with traditional authorities to protect sacred sites, and facilitating knowledge exchanges across cities. Building capacity of cities by creating green spaces as learning labs and providing training for elected officials, local technicians, community leaders, women and youth. What does the road ahead look like? We strongly believe in the power of collaboration and meaningful participations to conserve, preserve, restore, and expand urban forests, green spaces, and nature-based solutions, ensuring they benefit all. To support our future work, today we launched the Afrika Mazingura Collective, an African nature-based solution community of practices within the Center on African Public Spaces. This collective will connect urban stakeholders across Africa and beyond to promote, implement, and scale up nature-based solutions for city climate resilience, biodiversity, and livability. This community of practice will contribute to FAO's Green Cities initiatives. Together, we can create cities where the built environment, people, and nature thrive. By way of saying I do request to confirm whether this sitting supports this declaration. Can everybody say aye if they agree?
Aye.
I therefore declare, Chair, that the Second African Forum on Urban Forests declaration has been adopted by the sitting, and it therefore stands for the year 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was not perfect, but we tried to capture as much as possible of all the rich discussion we had in the last 3 days. Now, let me briefly run through what we have done and what we have seen in the last 3 days, while my legs still hold. Yeah. Okay, so I think one of the highlights for me of this forum was on the first day we actually had the mayors on stage, telling their story, telling what they have been doing in the cities. We had city, of course, the mayor from Johannesburg, but we had mayors from different cities in Africa. I think that was really a way to tell us this is who we're working for in the end. It's for the cities, and the mayors represent those cities, and so they're the ones that we should really having a long-term discussion with. But we had 3 very rich days. The first day focused on one of the scourges of our time, climate change. And so really we had what researchers but also cities are doing about things like flood control, looking at carbon sequestration, heat reduction. Heat is one of also the big challenges we're going to face. We also heard a lot about indigenous restoration. So what can we learn from our forefathers about restoring the environment in a meaningful way? We heard about alternative urban futures. Other futures are possible. Once again, the problem is us. Let's have a better imagination on what the future might look like. We heard about biodiversity, how biodiversity plays an important role in cities, but we also heard about some of the disservices that trees and forests can bring to cities. That's not all perfect, so we have to make good choices when we choose species, designs, and other things to make sure these disservices are minimized. The second day, I thought we heard a lot about health, about what trees and forests, what role they play in our daily life in terms of providing a healthier environment for us to live. They provide services that can help us. They provide, in fact, we heard about things like food security. So this link with food security, we heard a lot about environmental justice or equity, shall we say, about educating future generations about the importance of this. But I think we also heard some important things about the sacred nature of trees. Trees are sacred to many cultures in Africa, but also in Europe, in Asia. So trees have this aura of sacrality in the end. I think it's why we feel so connected to them. We heard a lot about informality, about how cities, particularly in Africa, have a lot of contrast between formal and informal parts of the city, and how we can actually try to, let's say, make the city greener for everybody, not just for the richer part. We heard about participation, and I think that was a very important point, and we heard about healing. We had a lot of how the medicinal gardens or medicinal plants can really be used in traditional healing methods. Today, the last day, I think we, having heard all these fantastic benefits, we heard about how do we actually unlock this potential through finance. And I think that was a very, very important point, because in the end, unless we have the capacity and the resources, it's very difficult to go forward. And I always say, to me, we need to change the paradigm. It's about turning what looks like a cost into an investment. We need to make people think this is an investment, this is our natural capital. There's a big return on investment, like make sure that's unlocked and captured. We heard about governance, we heard about monitoring resources, and a very important thing is, unless you know what you have, how you're going to manage it. So I think having a good understanding of the natural capital, of the resources, of the services is fantastic. And finally, we had a fantastic declaration read by our colleagues. So I think really, for me, it was a fantastic journey. It was the first time we had this type of physical gathering in Africa. Last time, unfortunately, it was virtual, and so we're not able to interact the way we did this time. And as I said on my first day, this type of event, to me, it's about three things: listening, learning, and making friends. And I listened a lot, I learned a lot, and I made a lot of friends. So I think for me, that was a success. I hope it was the same for you all. And really, at this point, I'd really like to thank the City of Johannesburg again. I'd like to thank the Center for African Public Spaces, UN Habitat, for really helping us put this together. I think it was a fantastic event. All the Salga was involved, other partners, our private sponsors. I mean, there's a long list. You've seen it already several times. But I think this was only possible thanks to this large, wide partnership. And of course, I will not forget the scientific committee who helped us put together a solid program, and all the others who were involved, including the technicians, all the people that helped us, the catering and so on. So I would say thank you all for being here. I hope it was as useful for you as it was for me. And I hope to see you again in a different life. For me, I will be retiring next week, essentially. Yay! I know my boss over there is not very happy, but that's the thing. So I'll be retiring next week, but I'm sure I'll continue to be in this space in some way or other. So I'm sure we'll cross paths in a different way. And now I know Ayanda has a final announcement. Please, Ayanda.
Don't go.
Don't go. Don't go. I won't go. Okay.
Thank you very much. I thought just before we close, I would like to say a few words.
Okay.
And to acknowledge someone who's truly special and thank him. Someone who has been key in convening these kinds of regional platforms across the globe. And this is Simon. It is. So he has already mentioned that he is retiring. So I want to take a moment to say thank you to you. I think he didn't just help to facilitate the regional platforms or convenings, but also he has supported implementation of diverse programs that promote urban forest in cities across the globe. So, as a convener of this conference, organizing it was not a small task, but Simon's calm, steady guidance and gentleness made all the difference. Simon, you always knew when to step in, when to offer advice, very careful not to impose ideas for the global north. You knew when to simply reassure me that things will come together. I think that kind of support is very rare, and we are so grateful, not just as the City of Johannesburg, but also the co-organizers and the scientific committee. And lastly, we think that beyond this forum, your influence extends far and wide. We wish you a retirement filled with rest, with adventure. I don't know about your legs.
We'll see.
With happiness, but I think more importantly, with love. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, now it's also, I'm also blushing now. So well, thank you all again, and I think really enjoy the rest of your time in Johannesburg. There's going to be field trips tomorrow. Remember, the bus for those who are in the hotel will be at 7. So we'll see. We're not saying goodbye yet. We'll see you tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And please make sure you come to the field trips if you want, or we'll say goodbye now. All the best. Thank you.